we will have two SAP Community members with us. The first is Vadim Klimov. He has recently been a member of the month of the SAP Community. He's not only an SAP Press author, he's also a blogger and speaker at SAP Tech events. He's primarily focusing on the SAP Cloud Platform integration suite. We have as our virtual host with us our very own Phil Cooley, CTO of Born Digital, and he has already architected over 75 web and mobile apps. He will take on the lead and fire some questions on Vadim Klimov about how to explore the cloud integration technology stack. With that, Phil and Vadim, so good to see you at SAP TechEd 2020. You both look pretty sharp, and I'm sure, Phil, you'll take on the lead here, and I throw over the virtual ball to you and wish you a lively discussion and interview.
Yeah, thanks, Max and Menina. Very good to see you both. And a lot of coffee helps to make us stay alert through all the number of sessions that we've been looking through, which is, in my opinion, been a really great TechEd. I'm really excited to be interviewing another SAP Community member and someone with expert knowledge in the topic of integration, especially SAP Cloud Platform Integration Suite. This year, I was able to be part of multiple projects in this area and really excited to see other use cases in the future. I'm also interested in hearing Vadim's areas that he thinks will take off next year, but we'll keep that little bit of information to the end of the interview. So welcome, Vadim. Did you want to just introduce yourself and say hello to everyone out there?
Yes, hi, hello. Thanks for having me in your studio. Although visually, it's really nice to be here, and hopefully we all will enjoy this next 20 minutes.
Yeah, thanks, Vadim, for that. And I hope we've got an audience of integration developers out there. So the first question I have is, why do you think it is important for the integration developer to have knowledge about underlying layers of the runtime, especially taking into consideration the deployment model of SAP Cloud Platform Integration Suite?
Yeah, that's a very fair question. Thanks, Phil. So I will start my answer from the other side. So when the integration developer starts working with this API service, they would normally see very few components they need to interact with, and lots of them are quite natural for integration developers, and most of them are interacted through the web interface. So a lot of complexity which sits under the hood is hidden from the integration developer. So for integration developer, the most critical and the most common thing that they will have to do is to develop something like this, to develop integration scenarios in the API to ensure that they can be deployed and that they can be operated. What happens under this is normally hidden, and normally developers don't need to be bothered about it, because as you mentioned, it's iPaaS. So a lot of things and a lot of integrities which go under the hood, they just happen, and they should never be bothered by developers, except few cases. So there are cases when advanced troubleshooting is required, or when optimization is required, especially when we come to the topic of performance optimizations. In my view, these two subjects, these two topics, is somewhat that commonly will drive developers to look further and to make few steps beyond the comfort zone and see what actually happens under the hood of what they developed and what they have deployed. And this is where we come to the point of understanding how this integration scenario that we see now gets converted into what can be deployed further to the runtime. And the second one is how this bundle that gets deployed to the runtime interacts with other components, with services that are provided by runtime, and with how it's operated, how it's executed. So the thing that is developed by the developer, although it gets rendered nicely, is not exactly the same shape and form that gets executed by runtime. So this delta between what developer develops and sees and what gets executed is where the critical mass of questions and sometimes interesting errors might appear. So I think these are two areas that bring developers to necessity of understanding some underlying components.
Yeah, I think that's really important, actually. One thing that I always say to my team is it's okay to have a sort of front view and an understanding, but the deeper they can go in understanding the underlying technologies, the better they can problem solve. So I think you're absolutely right if integration developers can just go a little deeper. So talking about learning and integration developers, Vadim, so what learning journey is efficient and reasonable from perspective of a balance between practical applicability and time expenditure as far as, you know, integration developers upskilling? Which parts of the learning curve are shallow and which are steep during in-depth exploration of SAP Cloud Platform Integration Suite?
Yep, fair point. So commonly it comes to the point that we cannot learn everything, or at least learning a lot of things requires a bit more time than we have in our hands to troubleshoot certain things. So it comes to priorities. In my view, it depends on which layers, and it actually comes up to which layers the CPI runtime gets composed of. Whereas some areas and some layers are natural to integration developers because this is their daily job and they are quite used to terminology and to architecture of those layers. And some layers are hidden gems which they have to look in very specific cases. So the most natural layer is what CPI developers interact on a daily basis. It's CPI specific components, user interface which they use like Web UI, and tooling that is provided by operations use, which allows them to get a grasp of knowledge about what is executed and how it's executed. Under the hood, we have the integration framework. And integration framework is literally the heart and the engine. It's the horsepower of the runtime node, because this one provides the middleware capabilities. So everything which gets developed in integration flows, it actually gets converted into so-called camel routes. So that those are routes which define the integration paths that messages come through. In CPI, the integration framework of choice is Apache Camel. And that's something that definitely is worth exploring, having a deep dive into. Good news are there are lots of materials about Apache Camel, and those are not specific to CPI, so we can learn a lot about concept of the camel, like what is the context, what is the road, how the road is defined, what are components, what are different processor elements like filters, and so on from so many resources. Here I would say that strong knowledge of BPMN, business process modeling notation, is a preference because a lot of underlying definitions is done using BPMN, and in particular in Camel, how it's used in a CPI product, the knowledge of domain-specific languages, in particular Blueprint XML, will be quite beneficial because all definitions that we compose in the web UI, our integration flows, they get converted into a BPMN-based Blueprint XML definition. And then we can get understanding about what comes into the bundle that gets deployed. And this is where we come to the runtime. So for the runtime of choice, the application container that is used by CPI is OSGI-based. And here we step into the territory of containerization, not the Docker containerization, so that's something different, but into application runtime container, which is quite modularized and which provides a plethora of different services out of the box already. And this list is just extended with so many others which are provided by CPI specific components. So this layer is where the actual execution happens. So the upper layer is still the territory of integration. The lower levels are real runtime. So this is where we can see how class loading happens. This is where we can see how bundles interact with each other, what's the life cycle of bundles. And all these components, all these services, they do have APIs. So they have, some of them, they have shell comments, although we cannot interact with the shell directly. And those comments are provided on basis of APIs with which we can interact. And this is the the beautiful part of what we use in CPI, as we can literally look into those components. We can see what happens there through those APIs. They are not public APIs published, for example, on API Business Hub, but those are APIs that are whitelisted APIs of the corresponding service or of the corresponding layer. So we can interact with them, for example, using Java or Groovy. And if we go lower, this is where we get to, I would say, the one of lowest levels that are still of interest for us. This is Java Virtual Machine and System Environment. So System Environment is Linux, and so we don't really need to interact a lot with Linux system. But knowledge of SAP JVM will be quite critical, because this is where we can benefit from knowledge of how threat management is done, how memory management is done, how garbage collection is done. And for some other aspects, like, for example, how low-level class loading happens and what is the hierarchy of class loaders. So these are really bottom-level topics. It takes a while to get into them, and it's not that common that integration developers will need them frequently. But in very rare cases, it might happen that they will need to go this deep and to literally explore internals of the JVM. Again, good news, SAP JVM provides APIs and provides tools that we can use to interact with it, to get statistics about its operations, and to look into advanced logging and tracing.
Yeah, Vadim, I'm a detailed person, so I really like the detail, and I really like how you've broken down each of those main components. So I think, yeah, as I said before, if integration developers start understanding those layers and start looking into them and try to understand them a lot better, I think they'll be better off in the long run as far as developing and also troubleshooting, if there tends to be any errors. So, Vadim, what tools do you find the most useful and instrumental when exploring SAP Cloud Platform integration technology stack?
Yeah, I would say that the critical, almost vital knowledge is knowledge of Java, because the entire CPI is based on Java, and all components that we have just touched, they're quite Java-centric. So good knowledge of Java specification and Java language, Java virtual machine as such is a real preference. Or some other JVM-based languages which can also help to develop the tools that can interact. For example, Groovy, that is used naturally within CPI by many integration developers to extend standard capabilities with the help of custom scripts. It can be also used outside of CPI, but to interact with CPI. The web browser is quite critical, because a lot of things that we can do with CPI, including exploration of CPI, it can be done from the web browser and sometimes from developer tools of the web browser to understand how web UI interacts with certain components. I shall say that SAP API Business Hub, and it has been mentioned many times during last couple of days in different aspects, is also useful for CPI as well, because amongst so many APIs that are published, not only APIs, but also process definitions, events, content that is published in API Business Hub, we also have whitelisted public APIs of CPI that are available in API Business Hub. So that's like a first stop for us to look into APIs that are exposed by CPI publicly for public, and that can be used by integration developers. So that's definitely something that I would put, I keep it in my bookmarks, and I would strongly recommend for others to do so as well, or at least to look into that on a regular basis. Some other tools that that are really helpful is shell tools, because a lot of interactions with lower components is done through shell. As I mentioned, shell is not really exposed to integration developers in a natural form, but we can install a lot of those components locally. So we can run Karaf container, we can run Apache Camel, either a standalone application, or we can deploy it into local Karaf instance and run it there. So we can literally have lots of hands-on experience in our local environment before we even come to CPI and before we interfere into CPI runtime. And good is this is not resource hungry. So these components, they can be installed, they can be deployed locally, and they don't need a lot of power of the machine. They can literally nicely coexist side by side with developer tools and can be used for exploration and for experiments, because some exploration, it requires some experimental work before we can really provide something production ready.
Yeah, I think I'm really keen on SAP API Business Hub. I go there a fair amount of times. And yeah, I was really excited by the announcement that the user experience is going to be updated. So I'm really excited to see that. I think it's Q1 next year. So that will be really good. Well, Vadim, for me, you've covered a lot of broad topics here with regards to developing in SAP Cloud Platform Integration Suite. You've covered some of the learning items for integration developers out there, and also gone through the detail in some of those components. So now I firmly believe that CPI is one of those areas, and the entire integration suite is really going to take off in 2021. So what predictions have you got for the SAP Cloud Platform Integration Suite coming sort of into next year and then, into coming years? I'd really like to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Well, from what I can see from past couple of years, we really evidence a boost in integrations which are brought to hybrid or even to cloud. So I see that there is a strong demand for applications to go to the cloud. And I think for integration is the main motor and the driver to really follow that and to go hybrid and cloud, because integration as such, it doesn't exist in its own silo. So it's always about integration of different services and different applications in the landscape. And given that the landscape itself gravitates and moves towards hybrid deployments, and for some customers, pure cloud deployments, so does integration platform. So what I think will happen, and it already happens really, and will just amplify over years, customers will go more and more towards hybrid deployments, because it's kind of safe harbor. So they can still utilize investments they did into on-premise landscapes, something that is very comfortable for them. They can also explore and leverage cloud capabilities, and they can literally unite these two worlds in their solutions, also in integrations in those solutions. And over years, I think we will see more and more cloud-centric, or at least cloud native integrations that will happen. Given that SAP now provides this integration suite capabilities rather than separate services, this also shall streamline and help customers with onboarding of cloud integration platform, because now it's not a box of different services, but now they can literally go into like one-stop shop. They can explore and they can make use of the entire suite. What I would say that for integration developer to keep pace with that new happenings and with the new capabilities, the critical part will be to never stop learning. And that was already told several times. I heard it yesterday when Max spoke to Nabit. It was already mentioned that it's very critical for any developer, and integration developer is no exception here, to continue learning. And there are quite a lot of materials to do so. So there are open SAP courses, Learning Academy. There are developer materials. There are materials published by the community. There are live streams by the developer advocates, and this literally brings a lot of information and a lot of good knowledge. Really impressive. And I would encourage to use that all to make effective use of this all, to explore other materials. And on top of learning by doing, I would say that learning by exploring is something that also quite critical. So that don't be afraid of exploring the tools that you got access to, see what happens on underlying layers, under the hood, make use of it, and try to understand where else you can apply this knowledge. And languages, frameworks, this is just another area where we can deepen our knowledge.
Yeah, I think great answer. And for me, yeah, definitely the Open SAP courses are a way to upskill. And I really like what you said about, I think all of those different services were different previously. Now they've all come into the integration suite, which I think is fantastic. Yes, I did hear Nabit, one of my mates on Twitter, talk about never stop learning. So yeah, I was really totally agree with him there. And yeah, so I think from hopefully integration developers got a lot out of this discussion, and it was really great talking to you, Vadim. So take care, and I'll go back to you, Max and Menina, now.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Vadim. Thank you so much. If there's one thing you'd like to recommend for CPI developers out there, one single sentence, like a basic skill or something they need.
I would say that everything about Java. Java shall be your best friend, or JVM in principle.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm qualified, Max, to be honest, but maybe I'll just say get involved and upskill, because I think it's going to be a seriously big area in the future.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, Vadim. And take care and have a good TechEd further on.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.